Chapter 6 of The Worm Ouroboros. This Librvox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jason Mills. The Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Eddison. Chapter 6. The Claws of Witchland. Of King Gaslark's leading in the attempt on Carcy in the dark, and how he prospered therein, and of the great stand of Lord Juss and Lord Brandock de Ha. On the evening of the third day, when as they drew near to within sight of the Witchland coast, they brailed up their sails and waited for the night, that so they might make the landfall after dark, for little to their mind it was that the king should have news of their farings. This was their plan, to beach their ships on the lonely shore some 2 leagues north of Tenemos, whence it was but 2 hours' march across the fen to Carcy. So when the sun set, and all the ways were darkened, they muffled their oars, and rowed silently to the low shore, that showed strangely near in the darkness, yet ever seemed to flee and keep its distance as they rowed toward it. Coming at length ashore, they drew their ships upon the beach. Some 50 men of the goblins they left to guard the ships, while the rest took their weapons. And when they were marshalled, they marched inland over the sand dunes, and so on to the open fen. And seeing that the most of them by far were of Goblin land, it was agreed between those 3, Juss, Brandock de Ha, and Gaslark, that Gaslark should have command of this emprise. So fared they silently across the marshes, that were firm enough for marching, so it were done circumspectly, rounding the worst moss-hags, and the small locks that were scattered here and there. For the weather had been fine for a season, and little new water stood on the marsh. But as they drew near to Carcy, the weather worsened and fine rain began to fall. And albeit there was little comfort marching through the drizzling murk of night towards that fortress of evil name, yet was Lord Juss glad at the rain, since it favoured surprise, and on surprise hung all their hopes. About the middle night they halted within 400 paces of the outer walls of Carcy, that loomed ghostly through the watery curtain, silent as it had been a tomb where Witchland lay in death, rather than the mailed shell wherein so great a power sat waiting. The sight of that vast bulk, couched shadowy in the rain, lighted the fire of battle in the breast of Gaslark, nor would aught please him save that they should go forthwith up to the walls with all their force, and so march round them, seeking where they might break suddenly in and seize the place. Nor would he listen to the counsel of Lord Juss, who would send forth detachments to select a spot for assault, and bring back word before the whole force advanced. Be sure, said Gaslark, that they within are all foxed and cup-shotten the third night with swilling of wine, in honour of such triumph as he hath gotten by his sending, and but a sorry watch is kept on such a night. For who, say they, shall come up against Carcy now that the power of Demonland is stricken in pieces? The scorned goblins? Ha! A motion for laughter and derision. But thine advance guard might give them warning, or ever our main force could seize the occasion. Nay, but as the ghouls in an evil day, coming suddenly upon me in Zarge's Aculo, gat my palace taken ere we were well ware of their coming, so must we take this hold of Carcy. And if thou fearest to sally, right hotly do I desire it. For if they open the gate, we are enough to force an entry in despite of any numbers they are like to have within. Now Juss thought ill of this counsel. Yet, for a strange languor that still hung about his wits, he would not gainsay Gaslark. So crept they in stealth near to the great walls of Carcy. Softly ever fell the rain, and breathless stood the cypresses within the outer ward, and blank and dumb and untenanted frowned the black marble walls of that sleeping castle, and dour midnight waited over all. Now Gaslark issued command, bidding them march warily round the walls northward, for no way was betwixt the lofty walls and the river on the south and east, but on the north-east was he hopeful to find a likely place to win into the hold. In such order went they that Gaslark with 100 of his ablest men led the van, and after him came the demons. The main strength of the goblins followed after, with Teshmar for their captain. Warily they marched, and now were they on the rising ground that ran back north and west from the bluff of Carcy to the fen. Full eager were they of Goblin land, and flown with the intoxication of impending battle, and they of the vanguard fared apace, outstripping the demons, so that Juss was fain to hasten after them, lest they should lose touch and fall to confusion. But Teshmar's men feared greatly to be left behind, nor might he hold them back, but they must run betwixt the demons and the walls, meaning to join with Gaslark. Juss swore under his breath, saying, See the unruly rabble of Goblin land, and they will yet be our undoing. In such case stood they, nor were Teshmar's folk more than 20 paces from the walls, when, sudden as night lightning, flares were kindled along the walls, dazzling the goblins and the demons, and brightly lighting them for those that manned the walls, who fell a-shooting at them with spears and arrows, and a slinging of stones. In the same moment opened a postern gate, whence sallied forth the Lord Corineus, with 150 stout lads of Witchland, shouting, "He that would sup of the crab of Witchland must deal with the nippers ere he essay the shell." And charging Gaslike's army in the flank, he cut them clean in two. As one wood fared forth Corineus, smiting on either hand with a two-edged axe with heft lapped with bronze. And greatly though the folk of Gaslike outnumbered him, yet were they so taken at unawares and confounded by the sudden onslaught of Corineus that they might not abide him, but everywhere gave ground before his onslaught. And many were wounded, and some were slain. And with these Teshmar of Goblinland, the master of Gaslike's ship. For smiting at Corineus, and missing of his aim, he louted forward with the blow, and Corineus hewed at him with his axe, and the blow came on Teshmar's neck, and so hewed off his head. Now Gaslike, with the best of his fighting men, was come some way past the postern, but when as they fell to fighting, he turned back straightway to meet Corineus, calling loudly on his men to rally against the witches and drive them back within the walls. So when Gaslike was gotten through the press to within reach of Corineus, he thrust at Corineus with the spear, wounding him in the arm. But Corineus smote the spear shaft asunder with his axe, and leapt upon Gaslike, giving him a great wound on the shoulder. And Gaslike took to his sword, and many blows they banded that made either stagger, till Corineus struck Gaslike on the helm a great downstroke of his axe, as one driveth a pile with a wooden mallet. And because of the good helm he wore, given by Lord Juss in days gone by as a gift of love and friendship, was Gaslike saved, and his head not cloven asunder, for on that helm Corineus's axe might not bite. Yet with that great stroke were Gaslike's senses driven forth of him for a season, so that he fell senseless to the earth, and with his fall came dismay upon them of Goblinland. All this befell in the first brunt of the battle, nor were the lords of Demonland yet fully joined in the melee, for the great press of Gaslike's men were between them and the witches. But now Juss and Brandok the Har went forth mightily with their following, and took up Gaslike that lay like one dead, and Juss bade a company of the goblins bear him to the ships, and there was he bestowed safe and sound. But the witches shouted loudly that King Gaslike was slain, and at this chosen time Corund, that was come privily forth of a hidden door on the western side of Carse, with 50 men, took the goblins mightily in the rear. So they, still falling back before Corineus and Corund, and their hearts sick at the supposed slaying of Gaslike, waxed full of doubt and dejection, for in the watery darkness they might nowise perceive by how much they outwent in numbers the men of Witchland. And panic took them, so that they broke and fled before the witches, that came after them resolute, as a stoat holdeth by a rabbit, and slew them by scores and by 50s as they fled from Carse. Scarce 60 men of that brave company of Goblinland that went up with Gaslike against Carse won away into the marshes and came to their ships, escaping pitiless destruction. But Corund and Corineus and their main force turned without more ado against the demons, and bitter was the battle that befell betwixt them, and great the clatter of their blows. And now were the odds clean changed about with the putting of the goblins out of the battle, since but few of Witchland were fallen, and they were as 4 to 1 against the demons, hemming them in and having at them from every side. And some shot at them from the wall, until a chance shot came that was like to have stove in Corund's helm, who straightway sent word that when the rout was ended he would make lark pies of the cow-headed doddy-pole whosoever he might be, that had set them thus a-shooting, spoiling sport for their comrades and endangering their lives. Therewith ceased the shooting from the wall. And now grim and woundsome grew the battle, for the demons mightily withstood the onset of the witches, and the Lord Brandok the Har rushed with an onslaught ever and anon upon Corund or upon Corineus, nor might either of these great captains bear up long against him, but every time gave back before Lord Brandok the Har, and bitterly cursed they one another, as each in turn was fain to save himself amid the press of their fighting men. Nor could one hope in one night's space to behold such deeds of derring-do as were done that night by Lord Brandok the Har, that played his sword lightly as one handleth a willow wand, yet death sat on the point thereof. In such wise that 11 stout soldiers of Witchland were slain by him, and 15 besides were sorely wounded. And at the last Corineus, stung by Corund's taunts as by a gadfly, and well nigh bursting for grief and shame at his ill speeding, leapt upon Lord Brandok the Har as one reft of his wits, aiming at him a great 2-handed blow that was apt enough to cleave him to the brisket. But Brandok the Har slipped from the blow lightly, as a kingfisher flying above an alder-shadowed stream avoideth a branch in his flight, and ran Corineus through the right wrist with his sword, and straight was Corineus put out of the fight. Nor had they greater satisfaction that went against Lord Juss, who mowed at them with great swashing blows, beheading some and hewing some asunder in the midst, till they were fain to keep clear of his reaping. So fought the demons in the glare and watery mist, greatly against great odds, until all were smitten to earth, save those two lords alone, Juss and Brandok the Har. Now stood King Geraint on the outer battlements of Corsey, all armed in his black armour inlaid with gold. And he beheld those twain how they fought back to back, and how the witches beset them on every side, yet nowise might prevail against them. And the king said unto Groa that was by him on the wall, Mine eyes dazzle in the mist and torchlight. What be these that maintain so bloody an advantage upon my Kempery men? Groa answered him, Surely, O king, these be none other than Lord Juss and Lord Brandok the Har of Crothering. The king said, So by degrees cometh my sending home to me. For by my art I have intelligence, albeit not certainly, that Goldry was taken by my sending. So have I my desire on him I hold most in hate. And these, saved by their enchantments from like ruin, have been driven mad to rush into the open mouth of my vengeance. And when he had gazed awhile, the king sneered, and said unto Groa, A sweet sight, to behold 100 of my ablest men flinch and duck before these twain. Till now methought there was a sword in Witchland, and methought Corineus and Corund not simple braggarts without power or heart, as here appeareth, since like boys well birched they do cringe from the shining swords of Juss and the vile upstart from Crothering. But Corineus, who stood no longer in the battle but by the king, full of spleen and his wrist all bloody, cried out, You do us wrong, O king! Juster it were to praise my great deed in ambushing this mighty company of our enemies, and putting them all to the slaughter. And if I prevailed not against this Brandok the Har, your majesty needs not to marvel, since a greater than I, Geraint the 10th, of memory ever glorious, was lightly conquered by him. Wherein methinks I am the luckier, to have but a gored wrist, and not my death. As for these twain, they be stick-frees, on whom no point or edge may bite. And naught were more to be looked for, since we deal with such a sorcerer as this Juss. Rather, said the king, are ye all-grown milksops. But I have no further stomach for this interlude, but straight will end it. Therewith the king called to him the old Duke Corsus, bidding him take nets and catch the demons therein. And Corsus, faring forth with nets, by sheer weight of numbers, and with the death of near a score of the witches, at length gat this performed, and Lord Juss and Lord Brandok the Har well tangled in the nets, and lapped about as silkworms in their cocoons, and so drawn into Corsey. Soundly were they bumped along the ground, and glad enow were the witches to have gotten those great fighters scotched at last, for utterly spent were Corund and his men, and fain to drop for very weariness. So when they were gotten into Corsey, the king let search with torches, and bring in them of Witchland that lay hurt before the walls, and any demons or goblins that were happed upon in like case, he let slay with the sword. And the Lord Juss and the Lord Brandok the Har, still lapped tightly in their nets, he let fling into a corner of the inner court of the palace, like 2 bales of damaged goods, and set a guard upon them until morning. As the lords of Witchland were upon going to bed, they beheld westward by the sea a red glow, and tongues of fire burning in the night. Corineus said unto Lord Groa, Lo, where these goblins burn their ships, lest we pursue them as they flee shamefully homeward in the ship they keep from the burning. One ship sufficeth, for most of them be dead. And Corineus betook him sleepily to bed, pausing on the way to kick at the Lord Brandok the Har, that lay safely swathed in his net, powerless as then to do him harm. End of chapter 6.